righty. Anyway, I'm Chris Unger. I'm at Northeastern University. I'm joined here by my good friend and colleague, Kelly Kahn, Dr. Kelly Kahn, who will be monitoring the chat throughout this session. So Kelly, if you have questions or things you want to ask the panelists as we go through this, she'll be monitoring that and raising some questions as we go along. We're going to try to go through this in a way so that we have a good amount of time to actually converse about some of these ideas. Forgive the dog out in the back here. I think we're having a, of course, I think we have a exciting presentation here today with 4 individuals that I admire greatly. This session is really about how to get the profession-based experiential learning up and running in your classroom. And we have it from a variety of perspectives. Melissa Wrenchey from the Tesla STEM High School in the Lake Washington School District in Washington State. Fantastic. Also, I should say Dr. Wrenchey, she just graduated and successfully defended a couple of weeks ago from our Northeastern Graduate School of Education or Doctor of Education program. Tammy Fry, who's been part of is the director of the teacher education strand at the Blue Valley Center for Advanced Professional Studies in the Blue Valley School District in Kansas, just outside Kansas City, has been there for a long time. Casey O'Mara, another graduate of our Doctor of Education program several years ago, who's in the director of curriculum and instruction in the Slate Valley School District in the west central part of Vermont, and is trying to do what he can to assist and support profession-based experiential learning in his district. And then finally, Jason Pasatta, who's working with several districts, learning and innovation specialist at the Ottawa Area Intermediate School District in Western Michigan. And he'll be talking about how he's trying to assist and support profession-based learning across several districts. So with that, I want to make sure that you do make use of the chat. If you have questions, we're going to have Melissa Wrenchey go first, then Tammy, and then Casey and Jason. And they actually created a Padlet, and I'm going to, do you want to go through the Padlet, and Melissa, and can you share the screen? And I'll see if I can you share the link to the Padlet in the chat window if you can, and we'll go from there.
Yes to all of the above.
Oh, nice and great. Okay.
And then I'll admit Henry. Good morning, everyone. Our afternoon, I guess. I'm still in the Pacific Northwest. We're finally getting some rain today, so I'm excited. I feel like my skin is, going to get a little bit more damp, like I'm used to. So I'm really excited to present to you guys here. And so what we created when we started getting together was a Padlet about how we could kind of talk about what we're doing specifically with experiential learning. And so we created, as you can see, these tabs that are here. And so we added our content in here. But the idea is that you are also welcome. Please do. If you see some content that's related to this or you want to add something to it, please do. The link is in the chat. So people are free to add on to more content. That would be awesome if you would. I'm just going to share a little bit about this activity that was probably one of the best ways that as our STEM high school that we did a content this year. And it's the first time that I've done something that actually involved like an entire community. And so that was probably something that was pretty awesome because I hadn't involved district physical therapists, student families, because during COVID, they were building in their garages with their masks on. We were able to have an authentic customer. And so it made that learning so much more for all of us. That it's become something where we're actually going to continue this event and build onto it in the next year. So the link up here is what our district forwarded. They created out of a video. And then down here is the actual Wakelet where we had students collecting the content. So I'm going to just go through the Wakelet here with you. Can you guys see the Wakelet now? Because I think I shared my browser, but I don't know if I shared the entire.
It's coming up slowly, and there it is.
Oh,
I
good.
like that. Yeah.
Good. Well, I took this from Autopia because I thought it was kind of fun from Disneyland, if you remember back in the day with the cars, and I thought that was fun. So this is a link and you'll love this. The kids created their QR code with their logo inside of here. And so that was something that my students have continued to add on to it. If you haven't used Wakelet yet with your students, highly recommend it because they can contribute, but they can also contribute anonymously. So this is the content they created. I'll show you a little bit of, this is becoming like a museum gallery. So maybe I'll just pause right here on this picture so you can kind of see this. It is an opportunity for students to take a ride-on car. They're probably about $150. You could get them from Walmart, typically is where they're listed here. It's part of a workshop called Go Baby Go. And so the workshop and this whole foundation, and I won't remember which university has been hosting it, but a university has been hosting this event. And the idea is that you get a ride-on car for a low expense. And then the student who uses this car is going to find it's a lower cost entry for them to be able to use a mobility device. And it also allows for adaptation for individual student needs. And so my students were granted these cars from Foundry 10, and they adapted the cars based on the needs of the students. And so when we met with our district physical therapists, as soon as I asked them, like, would you guys be interested in collaborating with us? The district was all over this idea. So they got very excited about what we were presenting. And so we were able to get 5 cars. We had 5 authentic customers, which were students that are in preschool. And we were able to adapt the cars to meet their needs. We had multiple meetings with them to design the content. And so this is where you're seeing them. They've staged these photos, but some of the fun stuff is that they built the project together. This is actually sewn. It's a interior that was sewn for the car itself for one of the students who needed this, Luca, who got a car designed for her. We had a big red button that the physical therapist gave the students. And then as you can see here, the car was adapted to meet Luca's needs. And so there was many meetings with Luca's family to make sure we were designing it. The students asked questions like, well, what would Luca like? You know, what are her colors? What are things she's interested in? So they'd adapted the car for the student. And then this is their presentation. One of the times they met at a local elementary school with Luca's family. These are the trifolds that when they presented at the end, they had to do something for their problem-based learning unit to demonstrate learning. They did some wiring, changing out some wiring. They even had to rewire things afterwards after they did some tests with it and realized this is not what the student wanted. So we had a lot of great sessions. And I think that probably the most enjoyable part was it was a full community event. And so you can see the students here are working collaboratively, designing for the other student who had a adaptation needs. And then you can see here, there's some really fun stuff that happened in here in terms of the poster itself. I'm going to open up the poster, and this is a nod to how we do things at Tesla STEM, including, wouldn't you know what? I'm going to go back to another one. Well, let me see if I'm sorry. I should have, I think the student has locked it up, or they didn't realize that it was locked up. Okay, I'll go back to another one. The idea is that we work in a problem-based learning unit. And so students will then create content for their graphic production teacher, but it also means that they do like a larger project collaboratively. So I'll come back up here to the top and see if I have another one. And that was just one of the parts that we have found that is an opportunity where all of the community got together. We had our graphic production teacher helping students. We had our computer science helping students with how to wire things. We had our physical therapist helping the students with how to make adaptations. So it became a huge community of people all working collaboratively. And our expectation is that we want to have the students use these mobility cars for the summer, come back in the fall, figure out what we need to do to make adaptations for these students as they grow. and then continue this relationship. You'll love this. We even have a plan for in the fall. We want to change their cars for almost like a Halloween type, mobility car. So we can even make more adaptations to just make it a little bit more fun for the student to get around. I'm finishing off here with just the ending product that the students have to present in part of their problem-based learning unit. This is the work of their graphic production teacher who shows them how to do charts. We did our quantitative and qualitative data. They do their own logo. They address the sustainable development goals here, you can see. Then they actually have this content that they presented to in that video you saw, a large group presentation that you see. And I'll just finish there. Any, I think, is it ready to?
Well, let me prompt you a little bit, Melissa, or I should say Dr. Wrenchey. I'm trying to do that a lot because, she should feel very proud of what she's accomplished. And we'll see if others have any quick questions before we move on here. But, well, this looks like a lot of work. Why go through the trouble of doing this?
Well, I think the key for us is an ongoing relationship with students, because maybe they're not all going to say, oh, I really want to be a physical therapist, or I want to be a computer scientist or an electrical engineer. But what they all want to do is learn how to work together and project manage something. And this has become something lasting for all of these kids. The other piece is during COVID, these kids were able to work together safely at somebody's home in 5 different garages at the same time, and they were able to do that experiential piece of learning how to make adaptations, to work collaboratively, to make decisions. They were all learning about each other. It became like probably one of the most impactful opportunities this year for a lot of our students. And a lot of our students, we just asked how many students want to do it. I had one student that she's jumped on it from the beginning, and she's going to go on to manage this. But I think the why is, you don't know where it's going to go, but what you can know is that your students will do something they've never done before. And it contributes to kind of some decision making they'll make in the future in terms of how successful groups can be.
Let me add another question. Why is it important to you, Dr. Wrenchey?
I like the authentic customer. So many times we try for an authentic customer. I've tried so many ways to think of, things that we could do. And I put in a link into our Wakelet for Project Invent, which is a great thing to do. Like if you're managing typically, I think, an elementary classroom where you have 30 students, it's a little bit easier for me to find a customer that I could make 30 students adapt to it. It's harder when I have 160 students. So what I loved about this is I found an authentic customer we could use.
Dr. Connor, were there any other questions in the chat we might want to get to right now, or should we keep going?
Yeah, no, people just introduce themselves. We have a couple people from Iowa, Indiana, Arkansas, Canada, New York border, Massachusetts, Kansas, Missouri, Vermont. So lots of people joining. No questions yet from the chat.
And I think somebody was asking, this is the classroom. How do you get things up and running, profession-based experiential learning at the classroom level? So I want to make sure people know that they're in that session, okay? So anyway, cool. All right, well, we'll get into a conversation as we hear all these, more of these. I think, Tammy, we're gonna roll it out to, I don't know if you're still outside Kansas City, but outside Kansas City. Introduce yourself a little better than I did and what you've been doing for a while, and talk about how you bring profession-based learning into the classroom.
Great. Good morning or afternoon, whatever it may be for all of you. Name is Tammy Fry, and I am, up until this summer, the teacher education instructor at the Blue Valley CAPS program. I recently retired from Blue Valley. I'm now teaching at a local university. And my passion areas are basically teacher education and this type of culture, quite basically. So what I'd like to talk about today is the educator mindset and how important that is to this type of culture. So I'm going to try to share my screen if possible. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Able to see the Padlet?
Yes, see the Padlet. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I have found I've been in the Blue Valley CAPS program since their onset, since 2009, and have seen a lot of changes, not only around the world, but in CAPS, and how that is all kind of played together in creating this wonderful culture for students. But, you know, if there's any program that has had to kind of have a foot in each world, it's been teacher education, I've noticed. Because coming from a classroom environment, one of the things that I feel strongly about is giving those teacher candidates at the university level the experience in these types of programs, because that's basically where we're going to push that type of thinking. And so what I found in this type of culture, and I'm going to go through the Padlet as I talk about this, is that it's a sense of modeling and a sense of executing. And I apologize, I kept putting the Padlet in the chat, but I found that if people come in late, they can't see some of the chat. So that's why I kept repeating it. So Melissa or somebody, if you want to put that in again, that would be great. I think that teachers, or educators rather, have a different role in this type of culture. And the number one thing that I think they need to realize about the role is the modeling. That this is not a traditional sense of education, that we're moving forward, and then executing that, giving that example to students, stressing that professionalism, but actually modeling that as well, those professional skills, etc. So I actually wrote down a little vocabulary, because I think that there is a new vocabulary with this type of thinking as well. Education that is community focused. Getting students outside of the classroom and realizing that there is a lot outside of those walls that can be learning for them. Confidence building, that students need opportunities in these types of experiences to show what they can do, to hone their experiences so that they have that confidence that they can go out later and be their own self-motivating marketers for themselves. It needs to be authentically assessed, and I'll give some examples later. Driven to chance taking. Students need to take risks and realize that it's okay to take risks, that the things that they're thinking about are important, and that they can come to fruition in a project or in a type of activity. Encouraging student ownership, challenging for them, voice and choice focused. There needs to be a professional atmosphere around them. So many times I feel, or that I almost get to the point of looking at my students as colleagues in many of our activities, rather than a direct down education sort of model. Flexibility focus, we need to be flexible in our thinking. Failure sensitive, showing students that failure is a good thing, that's where the learning takes place, and that it's nonlinear, it goes all different directions. In fact, when we first developed our curriculum at CAPS, one of the things that we really wanted to stress is that it was a very fluid curriculum, and that we didn't get so caught up in that linear chart of we're going to do this and then this and then this and then this, that we didn't miss a few things. And quite honestly, some of the best projects we've ever had were things that just came off the cuff, or we found, met someone at a conference and said, hey, let's try this. And those have been some of our best projects. So if we had been ingrained in a linear curriculum, we might not have taken those chances, and that would have been really sad. And then, like I said, engagement through modeling. And I always try to do the things that I encourage my students to do, whether it's creating a blog or being on Twitter in a professional manner. You know, students come in and they know Twitter in a very social and personal platform sort of way of thinking. And I always encourage them to, if they do that, create a professional Twitter, where they follow people like Daniel Pink and Will Richardson and those sorts of folks, to show them the use of that social media and the power of that social media, even LinkedIn, in a very professional way. That's why I really like to wait until a little bit later to get them on LinkedIn, because I want that professional mind shift. for them to kind of see the use of that in a professional manner rather than just a social media platform where they can post pictures of themselves and friends. So some of the things that are really important in this culture that we found to be really important is that inquiry-based learning. Having students look at big issues, having students ask questions, and having students act on those. And for many of our hacks at CAPS, where we've done all CAPS hacks and had students try to solve problems, or brought in community partners and had the students present to them or come up with solutions for problems that they're having, we focused on the global goals, so those sustainable development goals that I know Melissa mentioned earlier. The website here. Yeah, so all these different areas, and I know many of you have seen this before. If you haven't, it's a great place to start. But within each of these areas, then it kind of breaks down the overall concept into some very specific problem areas that students then can start to pursue and research. So it's a very good site to start at. Professional environment, presenting those, having them do internships. I like the idea of teachers doing externships. The time that I went to H&R Block and visited with their training program, it totally changed my focus and my thinking on what I was presenting to those students in my program. So those externships are really, really important, just as the internships are important to students. And then the collaboration and the branding. One of the things we did is work with real world scholars and built a company. And so they work with Ed Corps, and they actually put up seed money for classrooms that would like to create a company. And our students created a company that created this putty, manipulated putty for students who needed that manipulation, and actually made some money. Then you can donate it to a charity. You can use it for specific programs. It was great. The other, we had some elementary career cohorts. I noticed that one of my colleagues from Blue Valley is presenting on that this afternoon in the elementary focus. But those career cohorts, we actually worked with groups at CAPS that worked on specific areas. Our elementary students said, I think I want to be a teacher. I think I want to be an engineer. I think I want to be a doctor. And we actually got them in cohorts and had the students at CAPS work with those elementary students and help them solve problems and to create projects and so forth, and some pictures there. Now I'm going to move to professional skills. And Chris, how am I doing on time?
You're good. You're good.
Okay. All right. Just stop me if I'm going too long. In terms of professional skills, I talked about voice and choice and confidence. And one of the things that I think is really important that students have a chance to showcase what they've done. So portfolios, where students have a chance to post some of the things that they've done, lesson plans, technology in the classroom, or if they're in a design class and they want to present their designs, creating that professional portfolio early on. The next thing I talked about was student challenge and ownership of learning. And boy, did we, have a challenge of that this last year with COVID. And so normally I get the students out and about working in the community and doing projects with folks at Sprint, at ATM, in their training programs, in curriculum development, in training materials, et cetera, and leadership. And we couldn't do a lot of that when students were at home. So we brainstormed, the students and I brainstormed and came up with the idea of having an online conference for kids. And so they did. And the students from their homes actually created activities. And if I go to activities here, here's our website, and there's a video on there if you go to that from the Padlet. But they created all of these activities. They had a time set, and when we had it active, we had Zoom links here. And our elementary teachers could actually click on the Zoom link and come into this session. And we had our CAPS students actually run the sessions. Our teacher ed students read to them or did a project. They made fortune tellers. They played games. They did a science experiment, math bingo. They made monsters. They did I Spy games. So it was a very effective thing. And these students did this from home. So they took that ownership upon themselves. They became professionals in their own right. They were very proud of their website. And like I said, we have that video there that you can see them in action later on. I know that we've got some other presenters here. And then finally, Industry authentic assessments. And Melissa, I know, mentioned this in those authentic assessments with partners. And specifically in our teacher education program, one of the best ways I could get them out and do those industry authentic assessments was to get them out presenting as professional presenters. So we don't have any from this year, obviously, except for the kids conference, but here is a list of all the presentations that our students have presented. And they didn't just present to other students. They didn't just present to me. They didn't just present to a few teachers at CAPS. They presented to practicing teachers, some locally, some regionally, some statewide, and some nationally at the National Educators Rising Conference. So getting the students out in and letting them participate in those professional activities in a professional way. You see the confidence building and you see them take ownership of their learning. Okay.
Wow. I guess it's my response. Just wow. I think we'll come back. I mean, there's some shared sort of insights gained across the two stories that we've heard, or the two presenters that we've heard so far. Let's get back to that later as a group. I want to keep moving us along. And then again, people are actually asking questions in the chat. Please feel free to do that. They're getting answered. People are offering other things that they're doing, which is really totally cool. So be mindful of that. I think we are going to go.
There was a question in
yeah,
the chat that kind of
please.
came between the two presenters that I didn't want to
yeah,
lose
Yeah.
sight of. And that somebody asked, how do you embed content in these authentic projects?
Good question.
I can start with that. Actually using our community partners, university professionals, and those around us to help us develop those activities. One of the activities we did was a STEM activity where we taught a class 2 hours away over a double robot. And that came from a conference conversation. That is something that I didn't have in my curriculum, but that was developed. And just looking for those opportunities of those authentic activities.
Melissa, you want to add anything to that? Content.
So are we talking about content like course content, and how do you embed it into your projects?
I don't know. The person
Yeah.
yeah.
That's how
I guess what we did is one of the things that we know that's important for our students is that they try to work with electronics. We do a collaborative or an integrated project with the computer science teacher, the graphic production teacher, and my 9th grade intro to engineering, so that our students do have some of that understanding of how to do electrical engineering. So they have to take AP computer science principles, but we build into that an Arduino unit specifically. And then what we also know is that we work as a collaborative high school. We have 600 students. So we know that their introduction to engineering and Arduino is going to continue on when they take engineering 1. We know that they're going to use it when they do internships, and it may use something else. So we build in skills that we know that we're going to need in classes, so that when they go to an internship, they have a foundation before they even start there. I'm not sure if that's answering that question about content.
Yes,
I
put
it in the chat if I can add.
Janelle Phil was asking content like competencies and standards. It sounds like you probably have, both of you, an array of competencies and standards that you're working towards, and probably fully integrated into that. And if they're not getting it in your class, they're getting it in another class, or they've been getting it from a previous class.
Right. It's always that integration piece. And I think it's important to have that relationship, because even in a STEM high school, when people talk about graphic production, they're always surprised at how much we do with our art teacher. Well, she talks to people and finds out what are they needing. So she'll be working with the seniors and their biomedical engineering lab to figure out how students can design logos for the prosthetic devices that people are designing. So it's that integration piece that's really important, and the fact that people feel like, okay, maybe I'm not going to address those 21st century communication skills in this space, but maybe as we collaborate and work together, we're going to address them through, designing content for customers and sharing content. It has a lot that has to do with integration.
Cool. I think there is a raised hand, Kimberly Bridges. I don't know. Are you able to get on? Do I have to?
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we hear you. Yeah, go
Yeah,
for
I
it.
didn't know if this is really conversation based or if we're just
Well, it
supposed
will
to
be. It
listen,
will.
but-
We want to make sure to get through the other presentations. So if you have a
Well, do you want me to
question-
wait till the end? It
Uh,
addresses this question.
Okay, go for it.
I just was gonna say the integration part on our end, I'm very familiar with Tammy's program and first started learning from her years ago. Hi, Tammy Fry. Real fast is the integration. So in our CAPS program, I'm the education instructor I'm the instructor for the education strand, and they take college classes and we do teacher prep standards, just like the universities use, but it comes through all of this that Tammy just listed. So I know what the teacher prep standards are, and I know, but what I do is I'm very intentional in letting the students also know what the goal is, this activity they're about to do, this opportunity they have. And so they take introduction to education, and they take teaching exceptional learners. And so all those community partners and all those places we go into the community cover, just organically, naturally cover the content that is in the list of standards or in the college textbook. We don't even really crack open the college textbooks. However, I think being intentional and letting the students know that, because they sometimes forget, am I in a college class? Am I really in college? So I am intentional in doing that. But I think the integration really happens organically, yet with some intention from the instructor's side. Makes sense. I hope that contributes to the conversation. Thank you for letting me speak.
We can come back to that. Let's continue with, and Kimberly, really appreciate that. I think I understand completely what you're saying, but we can get back into it later. I'm going to get Dr. O'Meara. I guess I should refer to him as doctor. I should have referred to Dr. Fry as well. Casey O'Meara. He's out in Western Central Vermont. Actually, not right now. I understand he's on vacation and got out of the ocean and rode his bike to be able to join us, I think. But Casey, you are in a different position. You're the assistant superintendent or director of curriculum and instruction. So you're not in a classroom, but you are, in your role is to assist and support more experiential learning happening across classrooms in your school district. You've been very intentional about that. And I will give a plug in to Dr. Kelly Kahn, who's been working with you guys for a couple of years now on how I had at least 30 or 40 different individuals, instructional coaches, and so forth. They're like, what does a experiential learning, profession-based learning really look like in classrooms K through 12? But from your purview, like, what can an assistant superintendent or director of curriculum instruction, what do you do to kind of support and assist teachers to kind of get this up and running in their classroom?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, so I'm out on Long Island and it's probably 87, but there's a nice breeze off of the Atlantic and the water temp is 68. And so it's a very enjoyable day, but I'm happy to be here right now talking to all of you. I will go back to that pleasant place, but it's awesome to just have this as my only to-do for a day. I usually don't get that. So as Chris said, I mean, I have been very fortunate to be able to have a series of supports as I exited the classroom, but not entirely, I guess, in terms of defined in the fact that I had been a teacher and then I had been a building-based administrator at a high school, and now I'm in a central office role, and cannot thank enough that number of different supports that I have through Northeastern, through Next, but then also locally, the state of Vermont. And I saw a couple colleagues from Vermont, and then one from my school district as well. We are a fairly resourceful place. We don't have the resources that bigger states have. So we rely on kind of what it is we're able to recognize as benefits to student learning in a set of spaces that don't have a lot of big industry and don't have kind of private school options, that sort of thing. And so what has happened for us is we have defined something that would allow us to personalize learning for students throughout the state of Vermont. And that looks differently in different school districts. But what that allows us to do at a very early age, kindergarten, first grade, is to have students identify areas of interest, identify goals for themselves, even in a single school year, but then also identify kind of hopes and dreams. And so we've been able to develop a series of what I call kind of community consultants focused in kind of what I identify as anchor institutions in southwestern Vermont, in a fairly rural environment, but that allow us to expose students to not only kind of content that's being studied in, say, third grade or second grade, but also potentially how they could fulfill a hope or a dream connected into the community with a potential job or occupation. So we were able to do that, kind of building off of the question around content. State of Vermont identified as well that we would move to competency-based graduation, or we use the language of proficiency-based. And so that was intentional, as I said, in terms of being a smallish state, but wanting to prioritize personalization for students. That if we could identify what the, say, do is in terms of a set of skills that might be housed in some amount of content, if we recognized what that would look like at each of our different touchstones and kind of K1 all the way through the continuum, we identify those as high leverage kind of competencies. And so that allows our educators to design learning that would be better personalized to students' hopes and dreams. That looks very different, K1, 2, 3 versus middle school, and then of course high school. And so I, in my role, have been very intentional to parse out the pieces that provide that opportunity to connect with community stakeholders and those community consultants, aside from teaching literacy and how literacy can look in second grade. So from, I guess, the outset in my role as a director of curriculum, it was asked of me by the state of Vermont to be able to focus on that element of personalization, identify those competencies, and then as they being the agency of education in the state, designed what this forward-looking vision would be for school districts in our state. They did very purposefully put themselves in the space of work-based learning. And so because there had been a history of work-based learning, partnerships with CTEs, technical centers in the state, that allowed us as a K-12 to think through what that looks like, again, on a K-12 continuum. And so we were able to identify, apprenticeships, internships, job shadowing, all the different elements that would exist within a work-based learning experience, identify separate competencies that would be housed entirely within that work-based learning, but also overlay those competencies and experiences with what I just talked about of high leverage practices in second, third, and fourth grade. So that is a lot of kind of 30,000 foot high level talk to then say, how do you bring an opportunity for educators to collaborate, to be able to kind of bite size in appropriate ways based on their level of comfort approach this kind of ideal, if you will. And so I made certain that we had instructional coaches to be partners. One of the biggest pieces I think about any change, transformational change, especially if it's second order change, is that you have colleagues that you can talk to, brainstorm with, and it's non-threatening. And I know that colleague to colleague, those relationships really take place at the building level. Sometimes when it comes to a vision that might not entirely be housed in a building, yet how can we find folks that can see this vision, move them into spaces outside of the classroom, whether that's for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or however long it might be, to then kind of backfill or support and form this kind of, I don't know, PLC is too much of a stretch, but this learning environment where it's safe and you can brainstorm. Who is that community consultant that I can connect you with while you're still working with 25 students in a 6th grade ELA classroom? But yet the person who's that coach can kind of develop those relationships with the community, identify what those competencies might be and how it might overlay with an ELA class in 6th grade or whatever the competencies are we have there. And a lot of that comes from, I think Chris Unger has the saying of feed the need. One of the things that I recognized is I knew that I wasn't going to be able to entirely feed that need for the number of educators that we have in our school district. I'm not presenting the Padlet right now, but when you touch upon the learning ecosystem, which is the column that I contributed to, there is kind of an update of a strategic plan. So one of the things I've always found is that when we message to our educators and then we support them in ways and talk about, oh, thank you for whoever's presenting that. Yeah, the strategic plan action update. So what I really would just want to say is you'll see that there are very quantitative measures for student outcomes connected to standardized testing. That is sometimes mixed message when it comes to, well, Casey, you're supporting classroom educators with this philosophy of experiential learning connected to profession-based experiences. So what about this testing thing? So I'm very intentional in a lot of those links. Actually, as you just scrolled past, you'll see that there's a lot of links kind of supporting personalized learning and then the competencies that we've designed to then hopefully lead to increased engagement in learning so that when we see standardized measures, we can back out and say, all right, what was that student's profile? What was that student's learning experience? How does that then translate to a standard measure? And so we have other tracking tools that we use, but it's very important to me that in my role as I coach principals, dare say, help coach my superintendent, and then educators and coaches, that we don't see ourselves missing language. And I think it was Tammy or Melissa, someone spoke about language earlier. So I very intentionally try to make certain that everything points to what our student outcome measures will be, but that you can see built beneath it is everything that we're designing in terms of these different experiential learning experience, whether it be profession-based, place-based, service learning, etc. Thanks for whoever's, I don't know if it's Tammy, thanks for throwing that up there.
That was me.
Oh, thanks, Professor Unger. And so I guess the only other thing, it kind of goes along with what I was just saying. People design a lot of mission and vision statements. It's important to me that we be able to break out all of that language into visuals. And the kind of more we can synthesize our purpose, the better it is our community will understand our purpose, the better our educators will. And so you can see very clearly when you look at the Padlet, an infographic that I worked on, and we've identified these 3 core parts to our mission. And one of them is developing skills and talents to be college and career ready. And so that starts at an early age. And so I don't think it's ever too early to introduce our younger learners to potential professions, careers, college pathways. And so I make certain to take every opportunity just to synthesize, connect things, so that there aren't mixed messages to our educators about, we're having this PLC around, data that we've collected through our local assessment tool, compared with these experiential learning opportunities we're creating with a local employer, where students are off-site, kind of experiencing what it's like to work at a lighting company called Hubbardton Forge. That still all, is connected to our local assessment tools that we use, connected to proficiencies, etc. I think I talked a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that was overly helpful.
Well, let's return to that. I want to make sure to get Jason into the mix here.
You bet.
And then hopefully we'll have time for more conversation around it. There is a lot of material in that column that Casey put together on the Padlet we can come back to, but it's kind of like we're jumping from in the classroom and Melissa, Tammy program, sort of program wide, Casey district wide. How do you assist and support these kinds of opportunities, provide them for classroom instructors to be able to envision the possibilities, if I could put it that way, of having community connected, sort of experiential learning based, profession based opportunities. Well, let's jump out to, I think it's Western Michigan, Jason, if I have got it right. And you were working across several districts. And I wonder if you can come in and offer your 2 cents on what this looks like across multiple districts.
Hey everyone, greetings from West Michigan. I saw someone from Birmingham, so hello to the other side of the state. Give you a shout out real quick. It's so interesting to be here with everyone from across the country. So I do work for what's called an intermediate school district here in the state of Michigan, which serves multiple local districts. But what I really wanted to end on today is super practical advice for people if you're starting out this work. What might you do to kick this off and really get things running? So let me go ahead and share my screen so I can go ahead and show you my Padlet real quick. There you go. So my main message is the idea that you should really think big, start small, but be strategic along the way. So here in West Michigan, within the Ottawa area ISD, around 10 years ago, we developed something called Future Prepped, which is a program for educators across the area. So we serve 11 districts, about 55,000 students, and a variety of parochial schools, charter schools, and private schools. And we started in 2010 with 18 educators going through what does profession-based, inquiry-based sort of education look like. And through time, through kind of tweaking our model, we now serve over 400 educators a year. So in the Padlet, if you want to find out more, there's an overview of our program right here. But the one thing that I think was key to our success early was us being clear on our why. Why is this really important work? Why do we want to pursue it? And what are the skills and dispositions that we really want from our students? So way back in 2010, we developed what was called the Skills for Success. So we wanted to be really clear on what are the skills we want to see from our students in the future that are going to make them ready for whatever's up next in their life, whether that be a career, college, post-secondary training, or whatever else might come next. So we landed on, at that time, 7 skills that we came to through a community conversation with our business leaders, with our school leaders, with our community leaders, and with our practitioners actually within our schools as well, about what's our end vision for what a student looks like at the end of our system. And one of the protocols we use all the time to have this conversation is the idea of the ideal student. So you can think about this question right here. What would you want the ideal student? And you can think about this being at the end of your grade level, at the end of a student leaving your school, at graduation, before they go get their first job. What would you ideally want them to think, feel, hear, see, say, and do? We have a really just simple organizer where participants in our sessions typically draw the ideal student, and then they brainstorm around the side what they want to see in each of these different categories. It's super interesting when you do this, because when you have people engage in this kind of a focused activity, you tend to see some themes pop up that you've already heard a lot about today. Things like, we want students to be critical thinkers. We want kids who can communicate. We want students who are punctual and on time and have kind of good responsibility ethic, things like that. So this is a really easy thing that you could do with your team at school, with your school in general, across the district, with your community. And it really opens up some really good dialogue about what you might want to see in your local community. We've been doing this for a while now, and actually back in 2010, we had those original 7 skills. Over time, we've done these kind of processes and protocols across West Michigan, and we've actually landed on a proficiency progression and scales that go across K-12. So if you click on this one, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. We've found that if you try to focus on all 7 skills at once in your classroom in a project, it's going to make your head hurt. It's going to make the kids' head hurt. It's going to make everyone's head hurt. So what we came back to is the idea that in a good project, again, think big, but start small. Think about what are the 1 or 2 skills that you really want kids to practice and get proficient in. And then how are you giving students feedback and time to reflect on those skills over time? And part of what we did is we now have a progression of skills going from, you can see at the top, from K through 12, where in certain grade bands, students concentrate on learning or becoming proficient in those skills, so that over time is kind of a staircase where students are working on certain skills in certain grade bands. So for example, in K1, students are working on participation in good choices, whereas in 4-6, they're working in responsibility and reasoning, and then leading to 11-12, where they're starting to work in innovation. Not that you're not working on these like all the time. Obviously responsibility and reasoning is something that cuts across all grade levels, all, kind of content areas. But this is a way that we can be really focused and really sure that students are learning these skills, across the grade levels. Along with that, one of the things that we really believe in is the fact that the secret of the universe is really you learn the work by doing the work. You can't read about it. You can't watch someone else do it. You really get a sense of what the work's like by actually doing it. And when you're first starting off with the work, again, we really think that identify a framework that works for you in your classroom, in your school, in your district. So for example, this framework comes from the Buck Institute, or PBL Works. And we like this one because these are 7 moves that you can do in your classroom, even when you're not doing a full-blown project or inquiry-based experience with kids. So you can think about, as someone who's embarking on this work down the road, how might I take 1 or 2 components of these and work on that in my classroom and get good at it? And once I get comfortable with things like, let's say, student voice and choice, or reflection, or critique and revision, how do I layer on other parts of the project so over time I can build all 7 of these things within my classroom? So again, it's about kind of knowing what's the end product I'm working towards, and how can I purposefully really build in small chunks I get good at over time. This is all to say, last thing I'm going to leave you with is link at the very bottom is our educators over the last couple of years have started documenting projects that they find successful and that they've revised and tested over time. So if you go to this website, you can go to PBL Experiences, not that one, because that is a thing. I'm going to actually go to resources. There you go. So I'll have things like 21st century skills, what we use for project planning tools, things like that. But also has some other things like protocols and projects you might want to try. So feel free at some other time to go ahead and peruse this website, and hopefully it'll give you a good kickstart on your next project or idea. So thanks.
Cool. All right. So Dr. Khan, you've been
I
think
have
we
been.
sent
I
you the
have been.
chat. What do you get? What do we got here?
Yeah,
I'm
there's
looking
been,
at-
well, there's been some conversations about critical thinking. You know, there was the contents
Hmm.
and competencies, but relatedly, how do you work on developing these critical thinking skills in projects, and how do you push students to think critically?
Yeah, I think I saw that comment too. And in fact, I think someone said that the students don't want to think critically, but so who wants to, from our panelists, who would like to speak to that point?
Can I jump in really quick, Chris?
Oh,
Yeah, so I wonder, the one thing that we've gotten that works really well for addressing students' critical thinking and their ability to kind of push what they're making in their projects is having multiple iterations of a project or having multiple review cycles. So having a review cycle really early in a project before the final end piece is super critical to get kids to think about, am I on the right path? Am I pushing this far enough? And things like that. And also really early in the project, getting good, critical, authentic feedback from community partners, business partners, or anyone else you think that cares about the problem they're researching. Typically getting feedback from someone outside of the classroom goes a long way.
Yeah, and I'll pitch in there. One of the things that I think promotes critical thinking in this type of environment is asking questions and making the students aware of the things around them. For example, I remember one of the conferences I had students present, and the students came to me after and they said, did you see the two people in the front row? They were on their phones and weren't even listening to what we were saying. And I said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You mean that you were presenting this great information and these practicing teachers were not listening to you? Yes, wasn't that rude? I said, no, 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 wait a minute. Let me ask this again. You were presenting and people were on their phones. So it was this whole thought process of, you know, how students approach learning. But more than that, I asked them the question, well, why do you suppose they were on their phones? What about your presentation was not intriguing enough that they were on their phones the entire time? And so asking them those questions and just kind of pounding them again and again and again to these students and making them kind of come up with, oh yeah, this is why, and this is how we can improve it the next time, in speaking that reflect and revision. I want to answer too, and something on the content, and I appreciate Kimberly talking about the organic forming of content, because that is so critically important. Like I mentioned before, not getting kind of bogged down in that linear process. Yes, there are constraints and there are things that you do have to teach, but doing it backwards, you know, using that in design, looking at what you want students to know and then backing up. So we consider the in-task standards. We follow those. In fact, one of the texts that we use, Those Who Can Teach, actually has units in the book. Not that we go unit to unit to unit, we kind of skip around a lot, but it has units based on the in-task standards, the ISTE standards, you know, looking at those things that professionals in that career area or that profession are held to, and using those and then designing backwards from there to come up with the activities that promote that thinking. So hopefully that helps.
mm.
And I put this in the chat, but I think I come back to, I have found the most opportunities, or my students actually come back to me and say, this was my favorite project, when I give them choices. So I called it a publishing project, but I told them, what about a podcast? What about making a documentary? What about making a book? What about doing something else? It was related to space entrepreneurship, but it was that opportunity where when I give students choice, I don't need to look at all of those standards, because I can actually just check it off and go, oh, you just did your, you know, your digital media component. You just expanded your learning. I find that giving students a lot of choice makes for even a project that I didn't even think kind of suggesting to my students.
Yeah, I'll just build on that and then see if there's some other stuff in the chat, and then we're gonna let people, if they have a question, they can raise their hand. We can get them online here. That related to choice and also around authentic work. I'll hearken to the fact, I'm talking about doctoral students. I'm talking about, now I'm not about high school kids or middle school. I'm talking about 35, 45, and 55-year-olds. If I don't zoom in and have them work on something that they care about, which you can do when you give choice, by the way. And if I'll just put it this way, and it's a big part of experiential learning. I don't need to go down this rabbit hole today. I could always go down the rabbit hole if I wanted to, but if the learner doesn't care about the outcome or process or the product, there will be very little learning happening. So make sure that you figure out a way so that any learner, no matter what age, is working on something that truly matters to them. And then it's your job as a facilitator to organize that process so that's pushing their thinking. I'll leave it at that.
Looks like Casey had his
Yeah,
hand.
go Casey.
Yeah, I'll put my hand down in a second. One of the big things I talk about with our educators is recognizing limits as liberators. One of the things I think, and I think you've heard it from a number of the presenters, is when we allow ourselves to kind of broaden and get ourselves stretched as educators in classroom settings, we can feel real discombobulated. And so one of the things we worked on was creating learning progressions for K6 and then learning scales. And so we did that for items we call transferable skills and others we call habits of work. And we try to prioritize those through these personalized learning plans that we develop. And so again, all work, whether it's a foundations reading literacy program in first grade, or it's a work-based learning experience, or I don't know, an internship or dual enrollment class in a high school. All of these pieces, content area and otherwise, filter to these transferable skills and habits of work. Critical thinking is one of those. Students need to see what it is that looks like on a continuum. And not only do they just need to see what those words mean, then they need to see obviously models. And so when we talk about critical thinking in a specific instance in a classroom, it can seem very abstract. It can seem like, my gosh, I've heard about this in middle school. Similarly, our competencies that are content-based are the same. Well, they're not exactly the same, but they're the same for kind of Common Core, say for ELA and social studies and math, but they're different in first grade compared to 12th grade. It's the same for habits of work and transferable skills. So critical thinking, I think kids get burned out. I think teachers do too, about critical thinking and hearing about it. So I think it's very responsible, I think, to be purposeful and define what that looks like and what it doesn't look like as you explore different learning experiences, because there can be what I call just kind of innovation fatigue. And so a lot of ideas kind of fall by the wayside when there's not these limits as liberators, allowing folks to kind of streamline and start to gain some experience before they feel comfortable themselves. And then they can float around and find their different spaces and places with those, I don't know, I hate to use this term, non-academic, transferable habits of work stuff. That's it.
Cool. So let's see, do people are there any people that would like to hop on with a question for the group? It's been pretty unidirectional, which I don't really like that much myself, but does anybody want to hop on and ask a question for the panel or regarding how to get this up and running in a classroom? Or add in the chat if you don't want to get on. Nobody. All these incredible people on here. Somebody's got to have a question or make a remark. Well, let me push and prod here for the panel. I'll ask a question. Oh, here we go. Chris, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Fensky. Could you discuss assessment a little bit and the approach you take? So how does assessment work in these areas? Who would like to What does that look like, assessment in this area? So Tammy?
Well, I can talk about that. Aside from exposing my students to, the questions and so forth, the praxis tests and those things that they are going to be responsible for, I think and I think Casey mentioned it, and maybe Melissa, and Jason, but getting those outside evaluators is extremely important. Number one, students feel compelled to do much better things when they know that it's going to be assessed outside of the classroom. So coming up with those rubrics where you can have business partners and college professionals come in and evaluate the students and give them some of that authentic feedback is much more critical than having them create something and turn it in a classroom for a grade. And so I think anytime that you can do anything authentic, and you can still give students choice. Students don't have to do the same exact thing to show what they've learned. So someone on here mentioned, doing a blog, doing a podcast, something like that. I mean, what's wrong with that? Having students do assessments in different ways than our typical test on paper, and certainly holding them accountable for that and those standards and so forth, but giving them the freedom to kind of expand their horizons a little bit and learn with their strengths and their passion. So.
Cool. Any other of the panelists like to add anything to that?
I can jump in. So assessment looks different depending upon what the goals for the learning are, I guess. And so as I hopefully mentioned earlier, we spent a lot of time identifying those high leverage competencies that would exist at every grade level. And so we also talk about not every assessment needs to be tied to those high leverage practices. So you can still learn and participate in things and be assessing these transferable skills like critical thinking and otherwise, and not be assessing those academic skills. And our grade reporting system allows us to do that. And I'm kind of behind the scenes with folks, making certain that we report things and how that reporting looks. And anyway, but assessment is an important piece. And I think, as Tammy just said, when you recognize what those critical elements are, then you can begin to differentiate. And when working with those consultants in your community, they might already tell you this is what the assessment tool needs to look like, because we want you to create a 3D model of how we could potentially create a mold, what we're going to put metal into to fabricate a light, right? So that if I'm told that that's part of the project that I'm working on in my classroom, I'm going to design an assessment tool that probably looks pretty different than if I'm like, oh, geez, I really need to get through a certain element of a course because that's already been defined by my colleagues as something that I have to do. It might not fit with that project when I'm connecting with someone in the community. So having that flexibility and knowing that that's what I said by those limits as liberators, like recognizing where things sometimes just don't fit and being okay with that in terms of some assessments that you have to do as a classroom educator.
I'm Janelle Fielden. I am just thinking, I am just all about this because I really feel it's about the engagement. If they're not engaged, how are they going to be learning? But I come back to a K-8 thought on this, where we have our competencies / standards. We have our proficiency scales where we personalize to meet them where they're at. So as I look at, I'm just questioning myself. So on a backwards design, so we have our driving question, which we kind of call our session. And then is it right for us then to look within that interdisciplinary unit, if it's our STEAMs or humanities, and look at, because if we're needing to meet that competency and one learner could be at a 3rd grade level and one level could be at a 5th grade or a 7th grade level, I have to meet them where they're at. So my question is it, I love the interdisciplinary, the authentic types of challenges. is it best to also then run like a reading and a math lab opposite? So I'm meeting those skills in those reading and math labs, along with giving them skills and dispositions and content in the interdisciplinary projects.
I'll just jump in quickly and then others can build.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that jumped immediately into my mind is how you want to differentiate that process. So I think you were looking at a lot of like outcomes and probably products and figuring out how it is you could identify and assess those set of already identified, right? Versus what's the process that you want to create for the diverse room of learners that you have. And as you look at those experiences, how could you consider folks in your community as you go through that process? And so you might be producing something through that process, like there might be an artifact. That might not be the piece that's ultimately assessed because your creative constraints are you have to assess a certain number of indicators or standards. And so I don't know if you have that flexibility, but that immediately jumped into my head about when you have this interdisciplinary connection in your workshopping ideas, how is it that you can potentially bring in profession-based folks in your community and really differentiate that process based on student interest, those goals that I said earlier as they design kind of like personalized kind of plans within your course potentially. And I've found when I would teach, often there'd be kind of pockets of kids, like 5 or 6 might be interested in some concept that relates to maybe that engineering field. And so I could differentiate that process there and then move more towards that outcome-based measure separately.
Melissa, you had a hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the ways that we started incorporating qualitative and quantitative data into our PBL was that idea of we know we want them to be able to create charts. We know we want them to be able to assess information. So Janelle, it becomes a cool way, I think, for students to, no matter where they're at, like gathering data and then being able to do that math analysis and then that output of a way to kind of turn that into a language arts / addressing a articulation standard is, can you explain what this data is? Or can you look at your data and say, what information could I gather that I don't know? And it's a perfect way to address so many things in that specific way of addressing a problem-based learning unit with the customer.
Because I keep hearing from my leader that, well, we have so many 3rd graders that can't read. They can't read. So these are projects that we're starting a micro school within our rural district. Like, what are you going to do about that then? Because they're not going to be able to meet it through the projects. So you're going to need to have like a separate reading lab or a separate, lab here.
I think it would be interesting to at least attempt an integrated project like that and then be able to have the actual students to defend their learning. I've seen so much growth in students being able to do an integrated project, and it kind of it propels the learning into making it applicable and relevant. Whereas some people might define, well, they don't know how to read. Well, maybe you need to give them something different to read.
Tammy, I know you had your hand up real quickly because I have one final word and we have to sign off here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and realizing that not every product has to be finished. I had some students that started a podcast and they were getting it all ready to go. They never finished the podcast, but the questions I asked them were, what did you do along the way? How did you organize this? And they might do it later. And those are skills that they'll take with them. So realizing that not everything has to be finished process.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming here. I guess I'll add one word here, which I think is that there's nothing better than some actual authentic activity to engage kids and to be fully. I'm trying to figure out a way to send this to everybody here. Here it is. You can look at this another time if you want. This is a website where 2 of my podcasts are housed, but the website and the production of this web podcast this year was completely produced by 3 high school students. So the assessment is in the work. If you listen to the podcast, if you look at the video, if you look at the website, if you look at the YouTube channel, if you look at the assessment is in the actual work. And so we talk in the podcast about needing to get kids engaged in authentic, meaningful work in the real world for authentic reasons. And then all of a sudden it dawns on me, oh yeah, by the way, not only do I talk about it, but we had 3 high school students at Barrington, Rhode Island that produced our complete season 2 of a Revolution Education podcast. And so when you look at that, you kind of go, kids did that? Yeah, kids did that. I want to thank our panelists. I want to make sure everybody knows that coming up in 15 minutes, if you haven't heard Julia Freeland Fisher before talk about social capital and the need to support networks and relationships for youth moving forward, you need to do that. And you need to go to that and listen to these alum and talk about their experience. And beyond that, then you have a variety of different options. Any of those are going to be tremendous and worthwhile. I want to thank everybody for coming. Tammy, Jason, Casey, Melissa, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it. And I hope you found this a useful and invigorating conversation. Thank you so much, everybody.